What's up, everyone? Welcome to the first episode of Mindful Mondays. Santiago Valdez here. I am co-director along with this wonderful man to my right or left, I don't know, Kevin. We're both co-directors for development this year, and we have our first guest on the show, Carlos. If any of you do not know Carlos, I don't know how you wouldn't, but he is now and currently the president for SHPE UCF. So, Carlos, could you introduce yourself?
So my name is Carlos Arboleda. I'm currently the president of SHPE UCF this year, studying industrial engineering, minor in sociology. Been here since 2015. I'm excited to be a part of this. I'm excited to be the first interviewee, I suppose.
Carlos, thank you so much for your time here. Now, the topic of our podcast today was going to be around growth, understanding the journey that you've gone through. And we wanted to get a snapshot of where your mind was at freshman year, what your ambitions were freshman year, and just kind of paint us that picture of who Carlos was, about 5 years ago.
Damn, making me feel old. No, so 5 years ago, where was Carlos at? Carlos was coming into college, straight out of high school. I'd done the IB program. I was mentally burnt out. I was kind of wanting for a change, looking for a change. I was set on aerospace. I was set on what I thought was an end-all be-all passion for planes, space, and I saw that as the only kind of way moving forward. I came in with a very narrow mindset of, I'm here with my high school people. Like that's it. That's the end all be all. Like we're gonna graduate together. We're gonna stick together. And then life happens, and that's not the case, right? So Carlos came in 5 years ago with, not to say naive, but with a very fixed mindset versus
Mm.
where Carlos is now.
Yeah, you mentioned something here. You were in the International Baccalaureate program, IB. And for those who know, that's a pretty, I would say, rigorous program for high school students. And it tends to be kind of the finer students in the high school that are in that program and completely succeeded. I wonder what your transition looked like. So we're obviously very focused into, academics and aerospace. Now, when you finally got into the university, did you kind of have a shock? Like, okay, was this exactly what I expected it to be? Or did things not quite add up?
So a little bit of both. I was that kid who showed up every day at campus. I commuted to school. So even if I didn't need to be here, I would still be here. I'd be the one hunting down the free swag, free shirts, all the free stuff around campus. Um, I wasn't I wasn't necessarily very active as far as RSOs or student orgs or what have you, but um, I always found something to do on campus. I came in with kind of a disregard for my academics, right? I came in thinking it would all be easy. I came in thinking that it was just high school all over again, that now it's just a new campus, new school, kind of the same thing you go through between middle and high school, elementary, middle school. So that first semester, my very first GPA at UCF was a 2.6. So that to me was
Mm.
one of the biggest kind of reality checks of, oh, okay, now this isn't high school anymore. This is
Mm.
big boy territory now.
Yeah. And I know a lot of people have that experience when they jump into like that transition from high school to college. It personally did happen to me as well, but I did want to ask, man. So you talked about when you stepped in, right? Carlos freshman year, you're there experiencing the campus. Even though even you didn't have classes, I would have never done that. But that's awesome to hear. Now I'm wondering, man. So you mentioned the term fixed mindset earlier, right? So I think if you could agree, did the fixed mindset actually attribute to this? Oh, it's just going to be high school. You weren't really ready for that step. When when was that? If you can think of a moment that really got you switching over to a growth mindset, right? What was that moment?
I feel like it was a culmination combination of multiple moments. Um, However, I think one of the key defining moments for me was when you realize that who was worth keeping in your life versus who wasn't, and determining whether or not you actually wanted that person in your life anymore. And once I kind of established that and moved on from those those individuals, that's when I was kind of so in the direction of, all right, it's not just the high school group, it's not just high school anymore. It's okay, now what do I want for me? Um, so at that point, that's when I was directed to SHPE, right? And the only reason I came to SHPE in the first place was because I knew like 2 or 3 people, and I was, some
Mm,
familiar faces. My best friend was in it, and it was, I needed some change in my life, and I figured I'd give it a shot. At that point, I was a sophomore. All I had done was come to campus, go home, come to campus, go home, and now I
mm,
wanted to do something different. I'd brought my GPA back up, and I just didn't want to go through college just going through the motions. So
that's,
the biggest defining moment, I guess, to put it into one, was determining who I wanted in my life versus who I didn't want in my life.
dude, it's so cool that you mentioned that, because I've always kind of purposely try to surround myself with people that I'm like, okay, you guys are a good crowd, be the weakest link in your chain is the way I forgot the name, but someone says it like that. So I did want to ask, and you kind of touched on this. So there is a correlation between um, the moment you stepped into SHPE, right? And then the moment that you started letting go of the, it sounds terrible to say it this way, but the baggage, right? Like the moment you transition to, okay, like big boy territory, like you mentioned, right? So I guess that's a good way to step into SHPE, right? So now let's say you got past that first experience of like, high school kind of thing, the fixed mindset mentality. You're starting to surround yourself with better people. You're in a better circle. So talk about your transition into SHPE. How did that start to elevate your standards for your university life?
I mean, it was a game changer. Most of the people you ask now to describe me, they wouldn't describe me as an introvert. When I came in, I
Mm,
was a complete introvert. I wasn't very social. I kept to myself. It was the same handful of people. And then when I joined SHPE, I wanted to make that change for myself, so I went in running. Um, I joined in September. I went to my first conference in November. I was
wow.
incredibly active. I started, going to tailgates, to socials, to, events, hanging out with the board, the members. A spot opened up on the board the semester after I joined, and just in uh, spring of 2017, I went for it. I got the role, and since then, I've been an active board member, e-board member. Um, so for me, just it was a huge game changer because it was a whole it was a whole page turner in a time in my life where I wasn't sure if I wanted to be an engineer. I
Mm,
was failing. I wasn't succeeding. I wasn't moving forward when everyone else around me was. Um, so in part, me joining SHPE changed my outlook on university, on expanding yourself to new opportunities, growing. But it was hard to kind of keep on that journey with because you still had that baggage of everyone's moving on, but I'm still in this one spot.
mm.
Um,
But to sidestep from SHPE really quick, you did touch upon like you didn't know if you wanted to do engineering anymore, right? I know there's a moment where you actually switched over to industrial engineers, and I'm joking because I'm just an industrial engineer as well. But I know there's a moment that you transitioned from, was it mechanical to industrial?
so I did aero to mechanical, picked up a minor in sociology, and then did mechanical to industrial.
Okay, so I know a lot of students go through this as well, where they're kind of like having second thoughts on the major that they chose, but I know there's also some that don't feel like they should change just because, whatever sort of opinions are out there. What was that transition for you? How was the change for you? Did you experience a lot of resistance, either from family members or from yourself, even? Like, what was that for you?
So it's actually the opposite.
Hmm.
Um, so it's one of those things where at the end of the day, mothers know best. So since day one being aerospace, my mom said, do industrial, like just switch over,
Oh,
do
wow.
you. And I personally never wanted to because that was what my brother studied. And I didn't want to be seen as, oh, I'm just following in his footsteps or just following
Mm,
him, right? So I wanted to kind of stick to my own thing. Um, so I was in aerospace for about a year and a half, mechanical for about a year and a half, and it's something which wasn't clicking. I was like, this isn't for me. Like, but I was so stubborn, and I still am very stubborn that I just didn't want to switch. I wanted to stick to my guns and say, this is it. I'm not going to be an industrial. I'm not going to do it.
mm,
And then I got to a point where I was like, you know what? Screw it. I mean, I need to make a switch, right? My interests had shifted, my priorities had shifted, and I went from wanting to be very technical and very aerospace, geeky and all that to being more focused on the human side and people side of the industry. So when I
mm.
looked at it, I was, industrial made sense. And the moment I switched to industrial, everything started to fall into place.
Interesting. Yeah, there's this, I guess the perfect way to illustrate that is, you're trying to go uphill instead of just following the flow. Um, because you were, and I consider myself kind of stubborn as well, where, if I stick to something, I'm going to commit to it. But I also think a lot of students fall into this moment where, or not just students, but anyone really, where they become a little indecisive, and that indecisiveness costs them so much later on, right? Um, but then at the same time, you do need to give yourself, it's a nice balance between giving yourself enough time to consider all your options, but then when you make a decision, go for it. So yeah, that's something that I think takes a lot of courage to do. And I guess the blessing within that is that you had that family support, where I know a lot of people, like, sometimes they don't, sometimes they're just doing it because their parents want them to. And I really hope that people learn to follow their gut instinct as to what they want to study. So let's bring it back to SHPE, right? So you're back in SHPE, you go to these conferences, you're experiencing this growth. How was the process of rejection throughout SHPE? Was it all, you switched to IE and the doors open, like you mentioned? What was that transition or that growth process, right? Going to conference, taking on responsibilities, stuff like that.
Yeah, so my first conference was in Seattle. It was my first time. I was a sophomore. Didn't expect to get anything. I didn't get an
Mm,
interview. I went, had the experience. I saw what it was. And, I came back and said, next year's the year.
mm,
Next year, as a junior, I guess junior, sophomore, uh, I went to HENAC, again, no interviews,
mm.
nothing, but, I still had the experience. I grew, I did College Bowl. I learned College Bowl wasn't something I would do again. No, then I went to conference again in was it Kansas? I think it was Kansas, yeah. And that's when I landed my first interview. At that point, I was still mechanical. The interview I got was with Cummins, and Cummins is known for their technical interviews. So here I
Mm,
am, never been interviewed before as a mechanical, if you want to even describe me as a mechanical, and here I am being thrown into a technical interview.
mm,
And 2 minutes into the interview, I was like, this is it. I didn't get the role. I didn't like. I knew like 2 to 5 minutes in, I knew it wasn't gonna work. I knew it wasn't gonna work out. But
yeah.
um, so after that, I didn't get anything else. And the funny thing is, like, I got that interview the last day of the career fair, which is the day that people say you don't get interviews.
Mm,
Um, so I think that was one of the moments where I was like, am I doing it right? Like, am I doing things that I'm supposed to be doing? Like, what am I doing wrong? I'd been to like most workshops, I'd been to most events, like as far as SHPE, as far as the conferences, something wasn't working, something wasn't clicking. And then the following year, um, I I ended up getting CUP in the summer. So then that's when I was okay. I got my first thing. Here we go. Let's take this ride. And then between throughout all of that, I was debating whether to do industrial or not. And
Mm,
so you know what? I was like, I've been to conferences as aerospace, nothing. Been to conferences as a mechanical, nothing. Let me just shoot my shot and go as an industrial. Like, why not?
mm,
Uh, so then I made the switch to industrial in like 2 weeks before conference. I made the switch. So I go to conference as an industrial, and it was just interview after interview. Like everything just kind of like
wow.
when I say like everything aligned, like everything aligned.
Wow.
And a big part of that was having CWEP on my resume, but I think another part of it is, and I mean Kevin can speak to this, is when you speak to recruiters or you speak to that environment, they can tell when you're being genuine versus not. So
Mm,
I think me speaking to myself as an industrial with that human passion, that people passion, really did translate more towards this kid's actually being genuine. It's actually kind of going for what he wants versus
mm,
just going for what he thinks he wants. And so that year in Cleveland, I received my first official offer at conference, and that was the it moment for me to say, screw it, I'm finishing this. Like I've proven to myself that I can do it, and the rest is history at that point.
That's I'm glad we're kind of getting into the experiences of conferences, because for me the defining factor of my ship career, my ship timeline was Cleveland National Conference, where I attended, and I just realized, whoa, like all these people are out here trying to better themselves. There um, so many people who are really qualified for these jobs, and there's so many employers here trying to get people to fill them. I'm glad to hear your success story, but I realize behind every success story, there's a crowd of people who are kind of pushing these people forward, who are, hyping them up. I wanna hear about who have been, your greatest role models, who have been your greatest cheerleaders, and what role they played in your success and in your growth.
It's the reason I laugh is because it's so many people, right? It's not just one person, and that's been the beauty of SHPE is you're surrounded by I want to say hundreds of people that are always edging you on, pushing you on. Um, I guess to shout out some of the ones that stand out, and a lot of these already graduated, but I'd say Juniet Gonzalez was a big one. Julian Duque, Daniel Castro, Juan Matiz, uh, Jorcel Peña, Piera Castillo, Andres Vargas, Mariana Gonzalez. Uh,
wow.
I mean, the list goes on and on. It's every year. The beauty of it is the longer you stay in it, the more people you meet, and the more people kind of don't let you give up on you.
Mm,
And I was someone that was always very vocal about how I was feeling. I never held those emotions or those thoughts inside. I always talked about them. Is this for me? Like, what should I do? Like, what do you advise? And everyone just kept saying the same thing: just keep going, keep pushing, don't give up. You'll get through
yeah.
it. And so, Kevin, I wish I could give you just one person, or even just those individuals, but like it's just so much more than that. And that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, well, as the saying goes, it takes a village. And so far, your story, Carlos, after getting out of high school, or having that turbulence of confusion and maybe periods of unsuccessful ventures. Now you're here. Where is that next horizon? What is it that you're looking forward to now? And where do you think your growth is taking you now?
Graduation. No, honestly, everyone always says, have a 5-year plan, have a 10-year plan. Honestly, I wish I could tell you I had a 5-year plan. I've kind of learned to take and appreciate kind of taking things by ear, kind of going day by day. And you know, figuring out the next step once you get to that step you envisioned, right? So my step I'm envisioning now is graduation and going full time.
Mm,
Past that though, I really don't want to say, just because if anything, this pandemic's made me kind of really appreciate that things can change at any moment. And you know, I came into UCF with a plan. You know, I was gonna do aerospace. I was gonna do this or that. I was gonna be at NASA. I was gonna do work at Boeing or what have you. And it's, you know, that plan didn't work out. You know, and me being so stubborn to that plan caused so much detriment to me that, you know, moving forward, I don't want to have a plan that is going to hold me back as much as it's going to help me put myself forward, if that makes sense. Um, but I know I do, within the industry at least, I do want to eventually get into management. I do know that I don't want to be technical. You know, I'd rather be more on the people side of it. I know I want to end up to some extent in recruiting, and really helping people overcome what I had to,
mm,
and kind of show that, you know, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to do things at your own pace. You know, comparing yourself to everyone else is one of the biggest detrimental factors that you can do while in college.
mhm. Yeah. You know, something that you mentioned here, it's not so much of a question, more of a comment, but one of the things that Kevin and I spoke about when, you know, starting to make a plan for development and everything, was having certain themes that we want to really resemble what we're about, as a SHPE community, right? And this was actually in one of the first meetings, I think it was mindset, where we talked about praising the process and not the result or not the goal. You know, so the reason that we kind of brought that upon the meetings and everything that we're doing is because, like you said, had you praised the goal, you would have missed out on so much along the way. You probably would have been like, you know, about to graduate as an arrow right now and just unhappy, right? Had you done that. But instead, you know, maybe it wasn't in these exact words, but from what I see, is that you started to praise the process, in the sense that praising the process, I hope, is comes along as, or is shown as, like you're in there, you're in the moment, and taking in the feedback that you're receiving as you're going, right? That's how I see praising the process. The beauty of it is also that, you know, by praising the process, you redirect, because you're not praising what's wrong, you're praising the process, you know. So that's really cool to see, literally in these, you know, university years that you've had, along with, you know, SHPE and all the help that you've received. That's something that I think needs to be highlighted to all the students, because you're, like you mentioned, you know, the plan you come in with is very unlikely to be the plan that you come out with. Um, but that's the beauty of it, you know, that's the beauty of the unknown, of just kind of putting in the amount of work that you're committed to doing, right? It doesn't mean you work less just because you don't know the plan, but putting in the work and then seeing what comes out of those results, you know, and seeing the results that come out of that work that you put in, which has led you to here. Now, for the question part, if you could, and I'm really interested in your answer here. If you could go back and start as an IE, would you?
Probably not.
Mm,
No, I
that's
mean,
I was hoping you answered that. Keep
no,
going.
I mean, it's, you know, I mean, we're human, right? We want to take the
Mm-hmm.
easy route. We want to take the not, you know, it's, yeah, I mean, you want to take the easy route. You don't want to go through the effort. You don't want to go through the hurt, the grind, the pain.
Mm,
Um, but like you said before, it's by appreciating the process, you realize how much you have to not take for granted, and you realize how much the pain, the struggle, the tears, the doubt have really empowered you to take the steps that you need to take for you,
mm,
versus not going through that and just doing IE from the beginning.
mm,
And the funny thing is, like, the reason I didn't switch from aero to mechanical or to industrial because of a class, right? You know, I switched it throughout that time, I was, I'm not good at math, right? So I was failing math left and right. It's the math part that held me back. But I would sit down and look at the flowcharts and I would get scared. Whereas the IE one, I was interested, I liked it. So that's what ended up driving that was a big part in me making that decision. But had I started off as IE, I don't think I would have gone through that same doubt, through that same fear, through that same kind of reality check of, why am I doing this? If it's not for me, then for who? So I don't know if that answers that question. I know it's a very everywhere answer.
No, it does, because essentially, you said no, and I think within that, answer that you gave is because it's those choices and mistakes that you've made along the way that have led you to where you are today. We are a composite of all the habits and choices we made in our lives. So you never know the other option. You never know what could have happened, right? And that's the whole thing about regret. Never focus on what if. But what's cool is that though you wouldn't go back and study and start off with IE, right? You're here now, you're as an IE, you're looking forward. Something you mentioned that I think is a valuable tool for someone is to look at that flow chart, right? So we're talking about praising the process, but without losing sight of the goal, right? So there's two things that I think are happening or happened at that moment. One is your gut instinct when you looked at the flow chart and you were like, man, this kind of, this looks kind of scary. I'm not sure if I want to do this. You look at the IE flow chart, which I have it right there, by the way. I don't know if you caught that, but essentially you look at the IE flow chart and you kind of feel this excitement, like, man, okay, let's go. Now, I think something that a lot of students or members, I always mix those two, because we're all students and we're members of SHPE, right? One of the things you have to do is, it doesn't all have to be right? You don't have to love every single class on that flow chart to choose the major that you feel is best suited for you. I heard this thing the other day, and it was a quote, and I'm not going to quote it directly because I can't remember it. So many quotes in my brain. But essentially it was, you have to choose and look at something that's worth suffering for. Because with that suffering comes that fulfillment, because you earned something, right? So it doesn't mean you're going to enjoy and, skip your way along the whole flow chart. There's going to be moments that is going to require a lot of suffering, but that's where you have to remember, don't lose sight of the goal, right? Praise your process, endure the suffering, don't lose sight of that goal. But I think that's actually a clear theme that has been brought upon the story that you have,
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, I know a lot of people don't like to be driven by fear, or like to be driven by doubt, or like to be driven by things they can't control. But I think it's always important to have a sort of respect for the fear in your decisions and the fear in what you want to do, because it's that fear that's going to keep you on your toes. It's that thing that's going to make you think, why is it that I'm so scared to do it? Am I scared that it's what I know I'm supposed to do and just don't want to do? Or is it a fear of, you just don't know what's going to happen? And oftentimes, I like to think that I live my life by making the fearful choices out of partly not knowing what to expect, but also knowing that I'm so scared to face the reality I know is right for me. Yeah, it was just a thought.
No, that's an amazing thought. I'm glad you brought up that word fear, because that's something I've been thinking about recently. So there was a podcast I'm listening to, Kevin knows it, Impact Theory, and they talk a lot about fear, right? But the thing is that I think fear has been painted to be something that you should, not where, like, it's been painted to, like, if you're fearful, like, try not to be fearful, blah, blah, blah. The thing is, people, I don't think, see that fear has utility. There's a reason that us as human beings feel fear, right? It's there. And the thing is how you respond to it, right? So the way you respond is, between stimulus and response. That little gap that you have right there is your choice, right? And where some people, and this definitely takes a lot of practice, but I have a time where I was feeling some anxiety. I had just moved out. I was figuring things out. I think that's something else that we can attribute to, like, in terms of the 5-year plan. It's like we kind of don't know what we're doing. We know where we want to be, but we're figuring it out along the way. So I kind of had that anxiety, and I guess you could tie it to fear. But the way that, like I mentioned, that from stimulus to response, that little gap is where I just decided to go hard on myself and work, so fear is a very interesting concept, and it takes a lot of practice to be able to sit with your fear, like analyze it, let it be what it is, and then move from there.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thought there, Santiago. And for me, to take that point even further, is to really understand where that fear is coming from. I fear that I might not graduate, but is the fear really me not walking past that stage? No, the fear is really more disappointment, disappointment in myself, and then, a little bit more shallow, but others' disappointment in me. And so, since we're kind of on this topic here, Carlos, what are some of the things that you fear in the future? Right now, we're in a time where the future kind of is like a rug that got pulled off of under our feet. And I can speak a lot about what my insecurities and fears are coming up, but I want to hear a bit about yours.
Oof. Fear. I'll be honest, it's not something I like to think about too much. It's something that I know is there. I'm fearful of, like any student, like I'm fearful of not graduating. I'm fearful of kind of not doing well. But more personally, I am fearful of the fact that so much is out of my control, especially now with this pandemic, with everything. You realize how small you are in the grand scheme of things, right? And it's that fear of you can only really control so much, and I do get scared that I let fear control that. But I'm also fear of not being accepted, or like not being me, not being my own authentic self, wherever life does take me. And that's driven kind of by the whole, you grow up with so many insecurities, you grow up like kind of with dealing with so much hardship, right? So wherever life takes me post graduation, it's that fear of, can I be who I want to be? Can I be the person that I want myself to be?
There's this interesting I like, dude, everyone knows who Will Smith is, right? But he actually has such a powerful mindset, man. When you hear him talk, he actually has this video where they ask him about fear, and he sits down in the question and he's like thinking, you can tell, he's really giving it thought. And I loved his answer, man. And his biggest fear is fear itself. Like he hates feeling fearful of something. And that's when, I think it kind of takes some sort of chip on your shoulder to get over that fear, because on the other side of fear is success. I don't know if you guys have heard his story about the skydiving. It was one of the most beautiful ways to paint how fear actually works, because the further you are away from it, the more fearful it becomes, right? So he was like, the night before, he was freaking out, we're going to be jumping off a plane, blah, blah, blah. And then when he's actually, he's about to like back up, but his friends wouldn't let him. He's up on the plane, jumps, skydives, and he was in absolute bliss, So he talks about how on the other side of fear is just this emotion that I guess also that you overcame it, but it's not as bad as you were painting it 24 hours ago. And I've definitely found myself in those moments where I'm like, man, like, this kind of stuff is scary, but now looking back at it, I'm like, I made it through it. It's okay. I'm alive. I got all my fingers, like I'm okay. So fear is such an interesting topic to me on how, you can either let it completely freeze you, or you can choose to come out of that on the other side.
Yeah, these are all really deep conversations about, like what drives us, and fear is one of those primal things that drive us. This is kind of the part where we're going to start wrapping it up. I wanted to understand something real quick, Carlos, before we head out. We talk about, you have this growth, and we grow as people because we want to build our life resume, right? We want to be able to look back and say, these are the experiences that I had, and this is what describes me. I'm curious, if you were to have a life elevator pitch, very concise, very quick, what would it be?
So my life elevator pitch is, my name is Carlos Arboleda, and I'm a person. I am made up of successes, of failures, of pieces that have fallen apart and been put back together with the end goal of being, who I want to be and what I want to do. I'm someone who wants to embrace who they are. I'm someone who's okay with not being okay, and I strive to be someone that anyone can talk to, because for me, when I needed that in my life, I was always able to find that in someone else.
Mm-hmm.
So that's me.
Yeah, great stuff. So again, I want to thank you, Carlos. I've gotten to know Carlos now for a couple of years, and when I see Carlos, he was mentioning that you only see yourself through other people's eyes. When I think of Carlos, I think of somebody who's people oriented, who wants to be part of the success of somebody else. And I just want to thank you again for coming on and having this conversation with us. I know I love to see other people's perspectives, and it was great hearing your story. And next week we'll be back and we'll have another guest. I hope that everybody joins us. I hope that you enjoyed the conversation, and always never hesitate to reach out to anybody in SHPE. We're here to support each other, and we're here to hear everybody's story. Everybody has something interesting and somebody can learn from. So never hesitate to be a voice in this crowd. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.